Hi there, Greg Lewis, Orange Frog Photography. Today we're going to talk about shutter speed and creative blur, and the subject is going to be this rock. Okay, the first thing to understand about shutter speed is it's part of the exposure triangle that we've discussed before. That includes f-stops, ISO, and shutter speed. And today we're going to talk about shutter speed. Okay, so shutter speed is one of the more intuitive parts of your camera, right? I mean, you understand that a faster shutter speed lets in less light, and a slower shutter speed lets in more light. And that can capture or blur motion. But let's talk about that blur for just a moment before we move on. There's really a functional side of shutter speed and a creative side of shutter speed. So let's talk about the functional side first. Functionally, you want your subject, generally speaking, to look sharp. And the way you do that is proper shutter speed, but more importantly, proper focus. And a lot of people see a picture and they see it's, to their eye, out of focus, when in fact, it's blurry. And there's a difference between out of focus and blurry. And let's demonstrate that right now with Mr. Rock. All right, at this point, you're probably thinking, wow, that shirt makes him look really fat. And I agree, but let's try to move on and be adults about the situation. So here we have our friendly subject, Mr. Rock. And you're probably thinking at this point, that's a pretty cooperative subject. And you'd be right. He's not moving. He's not doing anything. So this is where I'd like to point out the difference between focus and motion blur. Being out of focus and motion blur are two completely different things. So focus itself could be the subject of video, and how to get your camera to properly focus on something could also be the subject of another video. But generally speaking, you understand your camera has the ability to focus on a subject that's not moving or anything. I mean, you can just focus on the subject using the lens and physics and the glass. You push the shutter speed button halfway down, or you push this back button, focus in my case, and you focus on the subject. Doesn't really matter what your other settings are as long as you've got a proper exposure, and you take a picture, and voila, you have a perfectly exposed and perfectly sharp rock. That was easy. Now, if you don't have your camera focused, like this situation, then you got, now, mind you, that rock is perfectly still, but when I take this picture, it's not in focus. Do you get that? Not in focus, not motion blur, not in focus. Okay, so when you're talking about shutter speed and you know you want a sharp subject, it comes down to three things. One, is your camera moving or not? Is your camera staying still? Two, is your subject staying still? And three, is your shutter speed high enough to compensate if your subject is not, or your camera is not, staying still? And that's what we'll talk about right now. Okay, now here is a rock of quite a different persuasion. This rock is ready to swing, right? Okay, now to make this easy on myself, I'm going to put my camera in shutter priority mode. That means the camera will use the shutter that I set, and it'll take care of the other settings like ISO and f-stop on its own. So let's go ahead and get started. The highest my camera can do is 4,000. Okay, so I don't think any more demonstration is necessary. So if you want the subject not to move, you need to make sure the shutter speed is fast enough, everything else being equal. Camera's still, subject's moving, shutter speed has to be fast enough. If the shutter speed's fast of like 4,000, it's probably not gonna, your camera shake isn't gonna be an issue either, or 2,000 or 1,000. It's when it gets a little lower that camera shake is gonna be an issue. Okay, so up to this point, we've gone under the assumption that you want your subject to be completely still. Maybe you don't. Well, we just showed that you don't have to have it be completely still. You can show some motion for artistic purposes. If you wanted to show that that rock was swinging, a little lower shutter speed. You're the one in control. Okay, now let's talk about not the subject, but the background. Okay, there's a lot of times where you want the subject to be in focus, but not the background. Like let's say you're taking a picture of a race car zooming by. You want the race car to be in subject, but if you use 1/8,000th of a second or 1/4,000th of a second, everything's going to be completely sharp. So the car may as well be standing still for all you know. It's not showing any motion in the imagery. And that's where the artistry comes to take, and that's where artistry, and that's where you become creative. So let's say you've got a, let's see. Let's say you have a giant teddy bear in the other room for no particular reason, and you want the teddy bear to be in the background, right? So now you get a bear in the background and you get a rock in the foreground. Imagine that scenario. Okay, so you got your swinging rock, and you want the rock and the bear to both be in focus. Well, you already know what to do. You just put your camera on a high ISO, or excuse me, a high shutter speed, and both of those things, since this isn't really moving, and this is moving, they'll just be in focus. But let's say you want the rock to be in focus, but you want the bear to be out of focus. Well, that's when you have to take this off the tripod and get a little more active. So let's do that now. So now, as we said, if you want to get both things in focus, then you just set it at a high shutter speed, right? And you just go, boom. Okay. So there's a shot where the bear and the thing are pretty much both in focus. Now, if you want Mr. Bear to be blurry and zipping by and give some sense that the rock is zipping by, you need to put your camera on a little slower shutter speed. Let's say 1/180th. The rock, more or less in focus, but now the bear is all blurry. So in essence, the bear is the thing moving, not the subject, even though the bear is static, because you're moving your lens along with the subject. I think I said enough about that. Okay, so you're saying to yourself now, I get it. I want to be able to adjust shutter speed to have artistic and creative and functional control over my pictures, but how do I do that? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. On most proper DSLR cameras, if you're in manual mode, this wheel right here will do your shutter speed. That's usually the thing that most cameras assign to that wheel. Some cameras allow you to assign it to different things, but most cameras out of the box, this front wheel here will be your shutter speed when you're in manual mode. And then when you go into, and of course in manual mode, you're having to control everything: shutter speed, ISO, and f-stop to control the exposure and all the creative elements. Now, if your primary concern is shutter speed, like you're at a sports event or something like that, then you do best to put your camera in shutter priority. Now, again, that depends on the camera. On Canon, it says TV. On Nikon, I know it says something else. Your camera may say something else. Just look at your manual and set your camera on shutter priority. What that does, as you can imagine, is now you set the shutter, again, using the same wheel, likely, and the camera does everything else. The camera compensates for you by getting a higher ISO if it has to, or lower ISO, or a higher or lower f-stop. Now, again, your camera can't do magic. If you're in a dark room and you get a high shutter speed, it's not going to work. And usually there's a blinky or something going on that tells you, I can't do that. So when you look through the camera, it'll be blinking saying, you've asked me to do more than I can do. You've asked me to go to shutter speed that's higher than I'm going to be able to take a properly exposed picture at. In summary, if you want to control the shutter speed, put your camera in shutter priority and dial in a shutter speed that makes sense to you. 1/4000th to catch a hawk in the sky. 1/50th to catch grass growing. Okay, that's about it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my channel and make sure to click on that bell so when I make new videos, you can be notified. Thanks so much and stay focused.